Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Tom Watkins, and I'm a product manager, and I work on Android Enterprise specifically. So I'd like to take the next approximately 50 minutes to take you through some of what the team has been working hard on, some properties of the ecosystem that we find make it ideally suited for some of the enterprise deployments that you and your customers may have in mind. And finally, we'll take a look at some best practices and a quick look at what's coming up in a future release of the platform. So firstly, some obligatory large numbers to throw at you. This probably isn't the first slide full of large numbers you've seen today. It probably won't be the last, maybe perhaps even in my presentation. The thing that I take away from this slide in particular is this final statistic here. There's 82% of smartphones, according to a Gartner study late last year, were shipping Android. And we find that incredibly powerful as a team working on these enterprise features, but also incredibly humbling. When I talk to friends who perhaps aren't in technology, aren't in mobile technology specifically, there's a very broad spectrum of awareness about Android as a brand and what it is and what it does for people. But yet, I find it incredibly powerful that when during those conversations, if they reach into their pocket and pull out a smartphone, chances are it's an Android smartphone. Chances are it's capable of running all of these management modes, all of these policies that I'll talk you through. And if it's not already running them, then it could be taken to a BYOD deployment at their company the next day. So we find that incredibly powerful an aspect of the platform, and we certainly hope that you do too. So that was on the sort of the overall side. What about enterprise? So another large number, or percentage of a large number. Here, we see a bit of room for improvement. Obviously, it's not the 82% statistic that you saw back on the previous slide. So the first and most obvious area that we want to grow this number in is doubling down on our core features. And I'll take you through some of those core features later on in the presentation. But really making sure that Android serves these managed use cases as well as possible, that your employees, your users are able to get up and running as quickly and as smoothly as possible, and that they are secured by default. The other, perhaps less obvious direction that we're growing in is this figure here caters for basically non-consumer usage of the platform, B2B sales of Android devices. And so we want to make sure that this works as well as possible for all different use cases, no matter what level of management is required, and that your users are able to be as productive and secure as possible, no matter what's required. Okay, enough of the numbers for now. What are we going to look at today? So firstly, I thought we'd take a look at the ecosystem overall, some properties of the ecosystem that I wanted to draw particular attention to in the enterprise space. We'll look at some of the form factors that we see, some of the apps and the app properties of the app ecosystem. Then we'll move on to what does the team that I work on, what does Android do in the enterprise, and how can you put these tools that we put into the platform to use within your organization? We'll look at security, we'll look at the two main management modes and what you can do with them. Then we'll take a look at some best practices and wrap up with a look at what the team has been hard at working on for an upcoming release of the platform. Okay, so firstly, a look at the ecosystem. You never hear mention of Android without mention of the ecosystem, perhaps in the same breath. The two are pretty much intertwined. Here are some properties that I find particularly exciting and particularly interesting about Android as an ecosystem. First is devices, right? There is so much choice of different devices that you can put to work for your users and for your particular use case. You'll hear a lot about the power of the cloud, particularly in this conference, and the tools that are available there to really serve a lot of different large compute requirements. I think actually we have one of the best jobs within this ecosystem, which is actually getting to play with all these physical devices and making sure that, helping our partners really innovate and make sure there's a device available to meet pretty much any different use case you can imagine. There's a few different verticals here that are almost conspicuous by their absence. I've pulled out the most traditional devices and their appeal for enterprise management, but obviously conspicuous by their absence are whole verticals in auto, Internet of Things, obviously, and TV. So there's definitely more. And the point that I want to make is that the diversity here is definitely more than just price point. It's about having a device for any particular different use case that you have in mind, whether that's a COSU single-purpose deployment that you heard my colleague Vidya talking about earlier, whether it's a traditional smartphone use case, whether it's signage or kiosk purposes. There really is a device for everything you can imagine. Now, with the scale and with the diversity of the Android ecosystem, it's easy to imagine that some amount of complexity may come with deploying applications and managing devices at this kind of scale. And while that's certainly true, the way that I look at this is that Android provides this platform, this underlying layer of consistency, where otherwise you wouldn't be able to have, for example, your same set of developers write the same app and have it run in a consistent way across most of these different devices. They wouldn't perhaps be able to benefit from the different the unified deployment platform in Google Play. And so there's a lot that we do, and it's really front of mind for the Android team in general, and certainly for the enterprise team. One of the areas that we invest in is ensuring that these devices can be deployed in a consistent way to your users and managed using a consistent API surface. So that's something incredibly important to us. I won't stand in front of you today and pretend that it's job done there. It's certainly a work in progress, but that's something that we find powerful, and hopefully you do too. The final point that I'll note is, obviously, these devices are capable of connecting to so many different cloud backends that I'm sure you'll hear more about later on in the talk. But just from a raw compute power perspective, these devices are getting so much more capable day in, day out. That certainly the flagship smartphones that you come across today are incredibly capable. The software that runs on them, the apps, is only getting more and more powerful over time. And we're starting to see these replace a lot of general purpose desktop kind of use cases already. And this is something that the team is very excited about, and we see growing a great deal over time. Okay, so a few more big numbers, apologies. This is about the Play platform. It would be kind of remiss to talk about the largest mobile ecosystem in the world without talking about the largest app distribution platform in the world, which is, of course, Google Play. Some of these numbers are just astounding, I find. 65 billion plus app installs through Play. I believe that was in the past year. 1 million plus apps available. Unique apps within the store to serve all of the different use cases you can imagine for these different devices, and 1 billion plus 30-day active users of Google Apps. That's Google Apps with a lowercase a. That's apps provided by Google. And obviously in the app side of the ecosystem, the app distribution side, I'll talk a bit more about this, like what we build into the Play platform to help you manage these deployments at scale shortly. But this is a key area, again, where we strive to bring consistency to the ecosystem. And finally, in this set of slides, a quick nod to all of our partners who make this possible. Obviously, this isn't the full gamut of partners for Android as an ecosystem, but it's phenomenal and again, quite humbling to think that a lot of these businesses, if not totally put a great deal of able to benefit a great deal from the ecosystem at large and provide for a great deal of their business from it. There's a partner for almost any use case and any deployment you can imagine, or a set of partners to come and enable that. So we're immensely grateful to our partners, some of which I know are here today. Okay, so I don't need to spend too much time talking about the size and scale of Android, perhaps. On to what we do and what my team works on in order to help you secure these devices and get up and running as quickly as possible. And again, the goal that we focus on here, first and foremost, is to bring as much consistency to the management and the deployment of these devices as possible, and be able to, for your employees to reach into their pocket and pull out an Android phone and get them up and running and productive in seconds. So firstly, let's take a look at what the platform provides. How does it all fit together? Really, on this slide, the platform is everything in the lower right side of the diagram. Everything that's outlined in blue here is stuff that the wider enterprise team focuses on. It's top of mind for us, and we provide tool sets in each of these components to help you get up and running. From the platform perspective, obviously, the bottom block here you see is the Android open source project, AOSP for short. This is the really powerful bit of the platform that enables all of our partners to extend and submit contributions to Android, and what really makes it unique as a mobile platform. Most of the stuff that our team actually works on goes into this AOSP level of the platform. That's the management modes that I'll talk you through later, the provisioning, the policies that get enforced. Most of it goes into this core underlying layer that underpins everything else. Immediately above the AOSP layer, you have Google Mobile Services, or GMS for short. And these provide really everything that is Google about Android devices. Some notable components that you'll have heard of in there is Google Play itself. There's a suite of security components in there that I'll talk a little bit about, and you'll hear more about in some other talks throughout the conference. And so these two pieces as a whole provide the core platform. There is an API surface that's exposed through these two components, and we work with our EMM partners, our enterprise mobility management partners, who actually sit at the app level just above this. The EMMs provide an app which is able to call these APIs. They're really responsible for setting up the devices and enforcing, choosing which policies to enforce to really cater for your particular deployment or your particular vertical, shaping that platform into something that's able to serve those use cases as smoothly as possible. Immediately above that, we have, again on the app side, there's a suite of apps that Google provide, most notably Gmail, Calendar, etc. We as an enterprise team put a huge deal of effort into actually making sure that the likes of Gmail is able to get up and running on whatever email backend you may have. You know, if your company is using Microsoft Exchange ActiveSync as a stack, for example, it's very important to us that you are able to get up and running on that using Gmail, and we put a lot of effort into having your users be able to get out of the box and productive by default. Likewise, the enterprise apps, I highlighted the 1 million+ different apps available in Play. This is a huge amount of investment in diversity that comes from the ecosystem and is really made possible from our ecosystem partners to serve all of these different use cases. Last but not least on this slide, we have a set of services that the team invests in. This is most notably Google Play. There's a suite of APIs that is available to our EMM partners to manage and deploy apps. I'll talk a little bit about how that functions shortly. And Safety Net, which is sort of the broad term for the security components that are bundled by default in GMS Android devices, which again I'll drill into a little bit in an upcoming slide. So here's a quick look at where Android management has come from, and I'll finish up by having a quick look at where we're going. So the first thing to note probably is that we've rebranded. You probably won't see much mention of Android for Work anymore. This was a rebrand, or technically an unbrand, back in December of last year. And what's happened, how the platform has evolved, has really led to all of these tools that were previously known of as being part of Android for Work, as being part of that offering. They're now completely bundled into any Android device. So any Android device that you pick up will be capable of running as a work-managed device, for example, will be capable of supporting a work profile as long as it's not a low RAM device, for example, and is capable of deploying all this uniform platform of policies throughout. So the unbrand, we think, makes a lot of sense in that respect. It does make it slightly difficult to actually talk about what we as the team do. So I'm thinking of starting a nice little sideline of an Android for Work swear jar, and I think that will generate a lot of profit, if not just from me during the course of this presentation. Okay, so more about the team's work and what we're up to. So the first management mode, if you like, and the first capability that we invested in way back in Lollipop when we came to produce what I'll refer to as sort of the modern set of management APIs that are available, is the work profile. The work profile really allows you to keep your employees' data separate from keep your work data rather separate from your personal data on these deployments. And we think that this is a really powerful building block for BYOD in particular. So for example, just in order to sync work data to the device, in order to be productive as an end user who owns their own device, it's easy to imagine that a lot of work data needs to be synced, but also a lot of work policy needs to come with that data to keep it secure. And the work profile really contains that data and the management that comes with it and ensures that nothing spills out into the personal side of the device. So we find this incredibly powerful for both end users who no longer need to worry about management taking over the rest of their device, being able to wipe out their personal apps and photos or anything else. And also for IT admins who don't want the burden of thinking about this aspect of their deployment and thinking about how users are going to have to hand over that much control over their personal devices. So some notable aspects of the work profile and the features that it provides. If for whatever reason your work data needs to be wiped, most notably the profile just disappears, the profile and the work data that goes with it. You can have a separate set of policies that enforce the screen lock complexity to get into the work apps. We find this is incredibly powerful for most sort of family use cases. You can give your device to a friend or a family without worry about the work data that goes on that's accessible or on that device. And they're independently lockable. The user is in full control here. So this is one of the two management modes here that we've put in from Lollipop and is available in the platform. The other is targeted for corporate-owned devices. So this is explicitly anything that is not owned by an end user. This has a few different names. Device owner mode is the name of the API surface that underpins everything here. You'll hear me talk about it as just in the context of corporate-owned devices a lot as well. And really the focus with corporate-owned devices is striving for maximum flexibility and maximum capability in terms of the management that you want to place on this device, in terms of the use cases that you want to set it to. And so you saw in the devices slide a while back that just the huge range of the breadth of different devices that are available. This mode really caters for anything from knowledge worker on a corporate-owned device all the way to fixed-purpose, hotel check-in kiosks or special-purpose devices. So a very broad range of functionality. For example, notably you can reset data on the whole device. You can enforce policies that affect Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth stack, and so on and so forth. You can even control. You get a limited amount of control of OTAs when over-the-air updates when they hit the device. You can schedule a maintenance window, which is important for some of our COSU use cases to ensure that your signage situation stays up and running when you want it to. Okay, and so next up in this section, what do we do as a team for Google Play? And I think this is a really powerful component of the overall picture here. Firstly, a little rebrand. It used to be Play for Work. Now it's Managed Google Play. Some more contributions for the Android for Work swear jar, no doubt. So this is another area where we simplify and we think bring a big investment in terms of a common layer of management and ability to update apps common throughout the ecosystem. So the first thing to note here is that public apps, any of those million-plus apps that I talked to you about earlier, can be selected and curated as an IT admin for your enterprise deployments and for your users. Those apps, once you've selected and created what's necessary for your deployment, you can use in conjunction with your EMM partner and the Play management console, you can have those apps pushed out to your end user devices, push installed inside a work profile, inside the workspace, or on the managed device as a whole. And you can have these devices just up and running by default as soon as the end user only needs to just set up the basic level of management on the device, and the rest of that deployment experience can be taken care of for them. And we find that incredibly powerful. Also, in terms of facilities and feature set from the Play side of the stack, you can have these updates, these apps, auto-updated. You can do that with private apps just as well as you can do it with public apps. So if your use case requires, for whatever reason, apps that aren't available to the public or even self-hosted, privately hosted, then again, you can do this and use Play as this unified stack for distribution. Only the metadata, for example, in the privately hosted app use case needs to be submitted to Play. The last, and I find most exciting bit of the puzzle here, is configuration at the app level. So we have what's called Mobile Configuration Management, or MCM for short. And that allows these enterprise applications to take configuration through the DPC, through the EMM, and through the Play stack, wherever is most convenient for you to store that configuration. And so this really pieces together to form a very coherent and slick end-to-end setup experience, we find. And so when your users sign up and enroll, they not only have the right apps, to get up and running and be productive by default, those apps that also contain a weird and wonderful mix of different server addresses and ports and certificate names and whatever else you name it, configuration to get up and running in your enterprise environment, that can all be supplied by default to the apps through this stack. So all the user needs to enter is perhaps a password. You can even leverage some of our native apps SSO work, and maybe they don't always need to enter their password either. So out-of-box productivity and speed of deployment for the end users is definitely something that's top of mind on our side. Another thing that's top of mind on our side is security. So I'll just talk a little bit about security in this presentation. I'd highly recommend, if you didn't catch it this morning, Adrian Ludwig, he's the Director of Security on Android. I highly recommend you watch that talk on YouTube when it becomes available. And likewise, I'll plug another talk tomorrow with Edward Cunningham, where he'll dive into a lot more detail about what's available in the Android security suite and how that all fits together, how that works. So I highly recommend those two. I'll just start by talking a little bit about the scale here. This is from our upcoming security year in review 2016. And the numbers are, again, pretty large. 1 billion plus devices protected. This is out of the box for GMS Android. 400 million device scans per day and 6 billion plus apps checked per day. So we noted in our previous year in review that probably makes us we believe we are the largest provider of endpoint protection in the world with these figures. We're certainly the least well known. In terms of what that means in numbers, again, so these are the rates of potentially harmful applications, or PHAs. Again, much more detail in the security sessions about how those break down on the different categories, but essentially for the purposes of this talk, we can consider them malware. The first thing to note is that the malware incidence rates, the blue line here, for all sources of apps, this is including sideloaded apps and apps that come from multiple different app stores in multiple geographies, the incidence rates are fairly low and declining, right? This is the blue bar. And even those other sources of apps, if you sideload an app on Android, then you still be protected by default by something called verify apps. So those apps are still going to get scanned and still going to get checked, and you will still have prompts to uninstall and warnings for known bad behavior in those apps. And so you see this number decreasing even on the top line. The bottom line, again, probably more relevant for a lot of enterprise deployments, is incidence rates from using Google Play only for your app distribution, which are an order of magnitude lower. Okay, so on to some of the best practices. We have talked a little bit about the tools that we provide, some of the features that we provide in Android as a platform. How can you put them to use in your customers' organizations or in your own organizations? This is quite a broad topic, as you may have guessed. So what I'm going to do is try and sketch out some of the axes by which we look at these management modes and which you may be able to imagine some of the deployments that you're familiar with and how they fall on these axes. So firstly, here you see the horizontal axis that I've drawn here is the use of the device, and the vertical axis is, broadly speaking, the value, and we go clockwise round in terms of the level of management that is required for this particular deployment. In the bottom right here, you have what's your traditional, basically a traditional feature phone kind of segment. There's little work data synced to the device, and hence little management and need for management. This is an area that I mentioned. We want to make sure that users benefit from the productivity side, even if they don't need the full heavyweight management that comes with it. This is where the traditional stack starts to come in. So the top of this chart here, you see the traditional knowledge worker type use cases, and that just ranges from personal devices and the work profile all the way through to managed devices and our corporate-owned device owner API feature set. And finally, everything on the left-hand side of this diagram, this is all catered for with our broad range of device owner APIs, this whole vertical. So anything that is corporate-owned, that is not personally owned explicitly, this API surface caters for knowledge worker all the way down to your fixed purpose kiosks that you may have heard about in the previous session. So that was a little bit about sort of how the API surfaces fit together and how they can be deployed within enterprise that you may be familiar with. A little bit of a look at some general best practices, and then I'll talk about pulling those out in terms of who owns the device and your particular use case. So no surprises here. You heard about the incidence rates of PHAs. When installing from Play. We recommend that if your deployment doesn't require it as a hard requirement, then you disable unknown sources, you place all of your apps within a apps distribution channel that you trust and that is useful for your deployment. Device encryption. So if you caught Adrian's talk, you'll have seen the statistics and the prevalence of device encryption and how it's increased over time. I think it was 80% he finished up with back in version 7 in Nougat of devices now having encryption enabled by default. So this may not be top of mind anymore when you're thinking about your deployments. We recommend nonetheless that you enforce a policy to require it, and we have a surface of policies that is able to do that for you. Minimum security updates. So again, the security talk, this is something that's really top of mind for the security team. There are policies that are available to require or set a minimum age in terms of the previous security update that hit your particular device that you're managing, and we recommend that you'll consider enabling those for your fleet. I'll talk a little bit more about those in the next slide. Excuse me. We recommend that when at all possible, if appropriate for your deployment, you would want to keep your work data and your personal data of your employees on those devices separate and managed separately. Last but not least here, use the latest management APIs that are available with a particular device. So I mentioned earlier we have what we call the modern managed set of management APIs that came about with Lollipop Plus. There aren't many devices now that you'll encounter in your average enterprise deployments that don't support those, but we recommend instead of treating the older device admin API surface as perhaps a least common denominator, we recommend that you support the latest and greatest, when it's available. And if necessary for older devices, if they're part of your deployment, if they're part of your fleet, then you can fall back gracefully to that older API surface and perhaps bring with it less privileged access to less sensitive information if that's appropriate for your deployment. And again, you can work with your EMM partners to decide where that bar should be. In terms of deployment type, here I've split it out in terms of personally owned and corporate-owned devices. So again, no surprises here. The management mode that you should be looking at if you're looking at a BYOD deployment, profile owner versus device owner. Security patches. This is slightly different in terms of your BYOD versus corporate-owned devices. So on the BYOD side, you're going to get a range of different devices taken and activated within your environment. So what you can do here is look at the security patch level that's available on this device, set perhaps a cutoff, a threshold by which the age of the device doesn't meet your requirements, or that the security patch level will not give access to the most sensitive resources. And this is how we manage devices at scale within Google, for example. On the corporate-owned side, we recommend that you look at OEMs who are regularly shipping these monthly security patches, and look to, if this is important for your deployment, favor those devices. For UX, we really look at this through the lens of device setup and getting users up and running as quickly as possible, taking them to that value as quickly as possible. Turns out no users go to set up management on their devices. Who knew? They just go to check their email and get kind of frustrated by the management that gets in the way of it. And so this is something that the team thinks very hard about, and we invest a lot in minimizing the steps required to get up and running in this space. We recommend that you would enforce policies and work with your EMM partners and your app vendors to do the same and really take away any hurdles, particularly in the BYOD space on the personally owned devices, to get the users up and running extremely quickly. Privacy. We think with the work profile API surface that I mentioned earlier, we think we've set what we consider a good baseline in terms of privacy, right? You have these two things, these two worlds separated by default, and there's very little management that is able to spill outside of the work profile. So we recommend that baseline will be hopefully suitable for your BYOD deployments. We recommend you just keep your users fully informed about anything that could impact their privacy. Likewise, on corporate-owned devices, I'll take you through some things that we're working on there to help you inform your users of any management that may impact privacy. Okay, so what is the team hard at work on? What's coming up next? It's kind of the namesake of the conference, so I thought I'd better slip in a few bits of information about what you can expect in a future release of the platform. First and foremost, here we have work profiles are going to be available for corporate devices. So this is almost a merging of the two worlds here. What we found is that the separation that is enabled by work profiles is immensely popular. And it's immensely popular not just in the BYOD space, but also in corporate deployments. And these corporate deployments don't want to have full oversight over the personal side of the device, over personal data, but they do want to allow the work data to exist in a separate space and benefit from all of these policies that we make possible. You can define exactly how data crosses these two boundaries as an IT admin. We find this really can improve the usability that's possible in corporate device deployments. Closely related to the previous feature in my note on privacy, something that's upcoming here is disclosures, reminders, if you like, of the fact that A, the device is managed, B, the name of the organization that is managing this device. It's not just on the lock screen you see in this screenshot, but a number of prevalent places to remind the user that they're not using a personal unmanaged device, they are using a corporate device here. And the second part of this feature is what we call the Privacy Hub here on the left-hand side. And this really discloses any policies that are in effect on the device at this given point, or that could be put in effect, and what this device is capable of. Some of the more privacy-impacting actions, for example, taking a bug report, sharing a security log. You can see when those were last carried out on this particular device. And again, the goal here is to help you keep users fully informed so that they can make the best decisions about their privacy. Device provisioning, I mentioned this is a huge area of focus within the team, and it's something we've invested a lot in on the upcoming release. a huge amount of investment, in fact. This effort here is focused on the BYOD side of the spectrum. So this is the work profile setup flow. We really re-examined all of the features and the components that go into the work profile setup flow from the ground up. It turns out it's enormously complex to have this secondary user created on an Android device, have the profile populated. There's a lot of server-side flows involved in the setup of your average profile deployment as well. So we've re-examined all of those dependencies, all of those components. We've managed to increase the speed of setup by a factor of approximately 10x. And get it down to, in fact, the maximum here, the ceiling is about 15 seconds maximum on the most complex of our setup flows. And the goal here is to get the user to that, to get the user to that value as soon as possible. What we've also done and realized as we've iterated on the work profile concept is that there's really very little to be scared of as an end user in setting this up, right? This is a benefit to the user, it's a benefit to the admin. And so what was previously present in the flow is a lot of different parties, right? There's a lot of different components that are involved in managing a device, and each of those parties tended to have their own terms of service, their own disclosures, and that would inevitably lead to a bit of a wall of text and a wall of scariness, for want of a better word, that users were faced with when they were setting these up. What we've offered here is an extensible surface that you can use to populate these terms and disclosures, and so if the user's interested, they can tap into view terms here, and they'll see a collapsible list of everything that applies to their usage of the profile. That can come from your organization, your company, via the EMM, come from the EMM itself, certainly from Google, and from parts of the platform and the OEM. So all of those can be consolidated now into one screen. So really, provisioning is just as simple on the platform side as one screen that you accept and continue. So this is something we're very excited about. Other improvements on the work profile. So really, the goal that we set ourselves here is to help admins to really double down on this API surface and look at areas where management sometimes needs to spill outside of the profile. I mentioned that we try to minimize that as much as possible, and the default answer to anything spilling outside the profile is always no. But there are some legitimate cases where you want to help ensure the integrity of the rest of the device, and so we're putting some features in here to really help with that particular use case, but still not impacting personal usage of the device to the extent possible. What we looked at here and what we were launching is Verify Apps strict mode. So here, any warnings that were present as part of the Verify Apps process that scans apps on install, they can become blocking, and they can prevent potentially harmful apps from being installed on the personal side of the device. Likewise, we're coming out with a lot of new APIs within Verify Apps to inspect the integrity and the status of any apps that are installed within the managed part of the device. Okay, data at rest protection. So something I mentioned earlier that's really become prevalent and commonplace throughout the ecosystem recently is encryption. So devices are now benefiting from encryption by default. They're also benefiting, as of the last release, from what we call file-based encryption by default, which is a lot more flexible system for encrypting these devices. It allows, for example, the device to boot up and for apps to be what we call encryption aware, and for those apps to expose whatever functionality is necessary before the rest of the device or before the work profile is decrypted. So, for example, the common use case here is that your alarm will still go off if your device is reboots during the night, or that DPCs can be encryption aware as well, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the features that enables shortly. So two headline items that we've done here, we've invested in terms of doubling down on the encryption stack. Credentials keys can be ejected from memory on the beck and call of the EMM. So there's an API that you can use if necessary to eject these keys and have that data at rest completely secure. And likewise with strong auth, so there are two types of different authentication that can protect a whole device or a profile, namely PIN, password, or pattern, and you can enforce strong policies on those types of encryption. That's what's called strong auth, strong authentication. There's also other trust agents plus fingerprints, which are slightly less strong but infinitely more convenient. What we've done here is exposed a policy so that you can set the timeout to require this stronger form of authentication as and when you need it for your deployments. Okay, so I mentioned about file-based encryption. What we've got coming up here is a feature for FBE. This allows for file-based encryption keys to essentially be, or derived keys, rather, to essentially be escrowed from the device. And so if your user forgets your password, or if the enterprise portion of the data on this device needs to be recovered for whatever reason, then you can use your escrowed keys via your EMM to actually reset the screen lock password of that encrypted volume. And that's everything in terms of new features. Absent from this talk, this presentation, was a few demos, but don't take my word for any of it. We have the Android management experience, so you can take any of the things that I've talked to today, with the exception of some of the up-and-coming stuff. That'll be available shortly. For a test drive, just go to the URL that you've got on the screen there, and there's a whole experience that you can get your devices up and running with these management modes and try them out for yourself. So with that, I think we've got a few more minutes left, 19 minutes left on the clock for Q&A. So feel free to ask me anything that's on your minds. There's a mic in the front of the room if you'd like to come up, or if you want to shout out your questions to me, I'll try to remember to repeat them. Hi there.
Just a question on the future stuff that you showed. Are those going to be a mix of Play Services updates, OS image updates, or one or the other?
So the question was on the future-looking stuff. Will that be part of the platform or in the services side of the stack? And the answer is it'll be a mix. Broadly speaking, the new sort of capabilities for the devices, the new work profiles on corporate devices, that'll be platform features available in an upcoming version of Android. There is a lot that I mentioned in terms of the security suite, Verify Apps capabilities. That's available in the GMS Google Play Services stack, so that'll be available on all devices and be updatable out of band from a platform release. And I don't think I looked at too many features on the Play and the server side of the stack, but there is certainly a bunch coming. I've focused more on the traditional platform stuff, so definitely a mix. Thank you. Hi there. Yeah, sure. So another plug for my colleague, Edward Cunningham. His talk is tomorrow morning, I believe. And he'll go into a lot of detail on what we call Safety Net, which is the suite of security services on the platform. Well, Safety Net comprises of Verify Apps and a handful of other different services within it. So it's quite a broad category. Again, from Adrian's talk, we haven't invested a huge amount in the branding of these security features, but it's just called Safety Net. That's kind of what it does. Yeah, I'd highly recommend you look at his talk for details of like exact APIs that are going to be available as part of that stack. Hi. So the Safety Net stack, most of our investment in the Android team certainly goes into the Android side of the platform. Yeah, so the question, just to repeat it here, was can we expand to iOS devices? This is not something that we're considering bringing to iOS or other platforms at this point, but we're really excited about what we're able to do on the Android platform as a whole and some of the use cases that enables. Yeah, absolutely. So I think our focus is really on making Android as usable and as manageable as possible for any different deployments. And again, this is a very broad spectrum in the Android world. So our focus is definitely on the Android side. But I think we find that features like the work profile and, let's say, more opinionated stances that we've taken on how device management should work, we're quite proud of that ability, that separation. And so we find that in some cases, in some deployments, it makes Android stand out when you're looking to choose a platform. But absolutely, and when you're talking about BYOD, you've got to cater for any device that your users will bring. So definitely something that will be top of mind for an IT admin with your kind of deployments. Thank you. Any more questions? I'll go over here. Hey.
The certificates has to be provisioned by the enterprise company. Like if it is a separate work profile, how will it work? Because we have a single key store, right? So will it be separately managed?
So the question is about certificate provisioning as part of the setup process. If you have a certificate that you need to provision on your device, how does that work with work profile separation, for example? And the answer is really, to a large extent, you can treat the work profile as a whole device. And so there is a separate key store inside the work profile, separately encrypted with the file-based encryption. And so as part of that setup process for just the work profile, you can have that certificate provisioned into the work profile side of the key store. Likewise, we have a VPN that's available just confined to the profile or to specific apps within the profile. Is that helpful? You're welcome. Hi there, at the back.
Is there a way to remotely opt into the privacy statement into terms of service?
Good question. So the question is, can you remotely opt into the privacy statements when setting up a device? And the answer is, the broad answer is no, that's not something that's possible today. Particularly on the BYOD side, we want to make sure that end users actually see this. For what I mentioned earlier, the upcoming feature, the work profile that's going to be available on Corp managed devices, we found that there is certainly a strong desire to have that set up pre-staged and executed without an end user going through it necessarily. So you can set up a work profile silently just on those Corp managed devices. That's the feature that's available on personal devices. It's not. The end user is supposed to be going through that flow. Likewise, with initially setting up the Corp managed device, you will be required to see one screen that gets accepted. But there's a bunch of ways that can be made very easy and a lightweight process. So you can NFC bump these devices to set them up. You can scan a QR code. There's a bunch of different ways that you can set up the corporate side. But you will be tapping one. You'll see one screen, yes, for that flow. Yeah. Hi there.
Can you talk about any feature to support a multi-user where a device is shared by multiple employees, and they each will need to log in and single sign on to multiple different backend systems over SAML or OAuth?
So the question is, how do you cater for, I guess, multiple user deployments within a managed device, sharing the same Android device? Now, I will say that actually the strength of the Android platform and the areas that we invest most in are on single user use cases. But with that said, there are a certain number of APIs on our device owner, corporate-owned API surface that will help with those kind of use cases. So one in particular is, I believe, called Create and Manage User, which is part of the Device Policy Manager class. And that will enable certain aspects of your deployment, but I wouldn't say that you're necessarily going to have a full end-to-end implementation possible right now, as of today. But by all means, take a look at the APIs that are available and the capability that's there, and figure out if it's sufficient for your use cases.
So there's no way to tie into like operating system user all back to my backend enterprise user account?
So the question was, there's no way of tying into multiple users on the operating system back to, this is more about an identity kind of problem with your deployment. So you want to have an account, a particular account associated with.
Enterprise identity, and then go back, and then once they log in, they go to sign into my backend ICT apps or Salesforce apps or.
I see. Okay, this is more of like an SSO kind of question. So yeah, depending on who your identity provider is and who, what type of accounts you're talking about, there are definitely tools and features available in the platform that will support that. What you might want to look at is I forget the exact, I think it's called Native Apps SSO, which is a open standard, and we've shipped an open library that's available for Android and iOS. AppAuth, yes, thank you. And so that's available to log users into multiple different IDPs, multiple different backends, and provide a common standard at the app level to get users signed in seamlessly. And that can be configured likewise via MCM, our configuration management. You can point it to your IDP, give it primers for your environments and your tenant IDs, for example. So that should help with these kind of deployments. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Anything else in terms of questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, guys.